I'm home, my home. I've always had one. And though it has its troubles and expenses, I wouldn't be without it. For it doesn't just give me comfort and company and shelter. It's the base of my whole existence, where all my ventures begin and end. A name without an address is nobody in our society. Not many miles away, the volunteers of the Simon community are bringing the comfort of tea and fags to people who have no address at all other than London's Embankment. The down and out, we used to call them, nowadays single homeless. Increasingly, they aren't just tramps, gentlemen of the road, defiant old meth drinkers who can't fit in and don't want to. More and more of those who sleep rough out of doors are young people who've come to the city to find work and can't. Social security regulations keep them on the move. And the police, who want them out of the way early. Few of the commuters who pass here in the morning realize what it's been like overnight. London is reckoned to have the worst problem of single homelessness in Western Europe. Cheap rented accommodation has been steadily drying up, and single folk get low priority for any council housing that's available. Our way of life discourages youngsters from staying on with their parents. It's hard to make a count, but there are at least 2,000 and maybe 10 sleeping rough, perhaps 40,000 squatting in slum property, even more in places so temporary and substandard they hardly count as homes.
Could you just check and see if today's...
Voluntary organisations offer a few dormitories for the single, but again, they're shelters rather than homes. London has its own special way of dealing with homeless one-parent families, the bed and breakfast hotels near St Pancras Station. Whole streets of these hotels are block booked by 3 or 4 inner London boroughs at a cost of more than £40 million a year, money that could have built permanent homes, but under government cutbacks didn't. Instead, it made a nice little income for the hotel keepers. Families stay here a year or more, cooped up, depressed, frustrated. It is certainly no way to bring up small children. London was one of the first of the great cities to become a human magnet for millions, the poor seeking to better themselves by their own efforts. But today, so much seems to conspire against those efforts. Is it any different elsewhere in the world's great cities? Urban poverty has become a global way of life. Must it be a dead end out of which no amount of hard work can lift its victims? Perhaps not. Zambia, locked into the midst of southern Africa. It's bigger than the United Kingdom, but the population is only 1/10 the size, so there's plenty of room. You'd think it should be ideal for self-supporting peasant farming, but there's hardly a country in the world today where people find that exciting. Like everyone else, Zambia wants to be modern, earn foreign exchange to buy modern equipment and play the modern game. Lusaka, the big city, is where the future is seen to lie.
king in Dollar Town. Remember this, me tell the man? Greg Meander, old governor.
Half the population of Zambia live in towns, though the unemployment there is massive. This is Cairo Street, the Oxford Street of the capital, and the hunting ground, as I learnt to my own cost, of the world's most skillful pickpockets. Why don't these people stick with the opportunities they know in the countryside? Well, what opportunities? You can sweat all year for nothing, they say. Life's fossilized, no water, no electricity, no fun. In that most damning of modern put-downs, country life is boring. President Kaunda threatens from time to time to send the unemployed back where they came from, but many of them were born here and they don't want to go. This isn't just a third world phenomenon. It happened in Europe not so long past, though our cities had more to offer in the way of work then. Lusaka has little. Unlike the Arabs and Indians, tribal Africa didn't produce cities. Lusaka only happened for the convenience of the colonial British. Native housing was laid on paternalistically by the employer, and often it still is. But with freedom, things got out of hand. People flooded to where the growth was going to be. In Lusaka, more than 40% of the population lives in squatter colonies, and the government was faced with either housing them officially, which it couldn't afford, or throwing them out, which was politically beyond the question, or reaching a compromise. Very sensibly, the authorities decided that if they couldn't lick the squatters, at least they could organize them. Rather than send in the bulldozers to flatten the slums, the government took advice from people like the American Quakers and sponsored various self-help schemes for the squatters to upgrade their colonies, or better still, put them up with some care and forethought. Many are based on the site and services principle, where the family gets a plot of land with the pipes and wires to hitch up to. The house it must build for itself, beginning with a standard core of perhaps one room. With luck, there'll be a loan to pay for the tin roof and cement. You can't visit one of these estates, by the way, without meeting the inevitable party committee. Now, you provide the site and the services. Does this mean that you put the water and the drainage inside the house, or must the owner connect this himself?
Very much over that. We have to provide sewer and water.
Yes. But he must connect them up?
Yes, yes. No, he must connect right up inside the house.
And the same with electricity also?
Yes, it's similar like electricity.
I see.
Yes.
So you're not sort of giving things away to people, you're giving them the opportunity to help themselves?
Yes. On self.
But it's not a free handout?
That's the thing. No.
What happens to the very poor people who can't afford this?
What happens is, if they work, if that person works, we only ask the employers to assist. There's certain letters we write to the employers to assist the employee to put up such a... to assist.
But if he is really poor, he is not working, so what does he do?
Well, when somebody is actually so poor that they can't afford to put up a structure like that one, it's just most unfortunate. Because the party cannot build somebody a house. So all that we are doing now is to encourage such people maybe to go back to the land. That we ask them to go back to the land where, in the village, where they can live the normal life.
Yes. Zambia's housing problem isn't lack of space. With an economy at the mercy of South Africa and the world copper market, it's lack of money. Self-help begins with making your own bricks. The treacherous holes get left as a byproduct. People were used to building for themselves back in the country, and their needs are simple. The appropriate technology, as the jargon has it, is based on very ancient methods. Basically mud and water with a little cement rammed into an ingenious mold. It may not look very advanced, but it's less important to bring this up to date than it is to lay on water and sewers and electricity, and transport so that people can get to work if they can find it. We shouldn't fall for the myth that it's always so mild in the third world that no one needs more than a palm tree to sleep under. Out in Lusaka, at a time when officially it never rains, I ran into a hailstorm that sent me whimpering for cover. I have my doubts about the comfort of a tin roof under the tropical sun. When it hails, the noise is deafening. But at least it's totally waterproof, if you care about keeping dry. Shelter alone is not a cure-all. The lack of proper housing is always a symptom of other ills, of social upheaval, unemployment, broken families, though the third world has fewer of those. Such conditions bring a host of other problems like insecurity, teenage crime, a general inability to cope. Somebody has to pull the community together, and in Zambia it tends to be the National Party, UNIP, which allocates the sites, supervises the work, and keeps order. Lusaka is not a mature city with much industry or wealthy ratepayers. It has to live from hand to mouth these days.
And it's a real pleasure. Good.
So
We can
we're
do.
going to see the houses that used to be the way they used to be. This house is made of sun-dried bricks. Before the project came in, this is the house we actually found.
I see.
Sun-dried, and sometimes it's not very, very good, especially when it rains like this, as it rained today. Explaining to you from that point of view, you could see that that is an old house which was used with sun-dried bricks.
And then he's plastered it, has he?
And it is plastered also on the other side.
Yes.
But due to the rain, you could see that those bricks are worn out.
Yes.
But the owner, because of the project now, he has started building another core house here. The intention is that he's going to demolish that house and move into the new house. And you could see that he has already roofed the other side, and he's already going ahead.
Now,
roofing
he's done the work himself.
Yes.
But obviously the bricks cost money. Who paid for them?
Well, we had a loan, a small loan which we used to call an improvement loan, which most residents in the existing areas took the opportunity of getting it in order to purchase building materials.
Can you still make those loans?
At the moment, we are unable to do that.
So against the European approach of putting up high-grade housing immediately, the third world starts humbly and then encourages the occupants to upgrade it. As far as possible, it's do it yourself, or do it ourselves, working in teams. If we all work together, I was told, the house goes up quickly and everyone's pleased. If we each build alone, it's slow and we get discouraged. It's certain that very few people would get housed if Lusaka depended on private landlords and developers to put up high-class estates or blocks of flats. In any case, though these people have come to the city, they haven't entirely left the country. They don't like flats. They crave a bit of ground for fruit and vegetables, with a country market round the corner and all its bustle and colour. The fact that most of the people live in housing controlled by the government party, UNIP for short, could be open to abuse and exploitation. It might be unwise not to hang President Kaunda's picture on the wall. But one doesn't get the impression of a regimented police state here, and you certainly can't say the people are not encouraged to run their own affairs. The most vulnerable point is that everything from foodstuff to building cement is at the mercy of the state-run economy, and when that gets into trouble, as it is now, the loans dry up, the pipes and cables don't get laid, and everything comes to a halt. Once again, the authorities start threatening to ship the homeless and jobless back to the boring countryside. Even a communal water tap is a luxury the village may not have, a treasure worth staying on for at all costs. These settlements, then, sum up the very lives of their inhabitants, the hard work they put into building them, the security they never had as squatters. Some Zambians, of course, are a little more equal than others. These smart, contractor-built quarters are for government servants of a certain rank. Well, the British took care of their own too. Down in the beer hall, something stirred, a Zambian rock group that isn't going to make it to the charts. But that's one thing you can't miss in the third world, the ability of the poor to have fun together in a way that doesn't come through in more fortunate countries. The pelvic vitality of this chorus line would have made a bishop kick a hole in a stained glass window. And the local beer's not bad either. According to the girls, they've put this act together from bits and pieces of different tribal dances. The costumes are less traditional. Half a world away, on the edge of the Pacific, Manila, capital of the Philippines, stages one of its sunsets. Now the jeepneys, the mini-buses of Manila, let rip the rush hour. This was a booming city before Lusaka was even a village. Heroes of the Philippines preside over a city 4 times liberated, from the Spanish, from the Japanese, from the Americans, from Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. Filipinos say the Spanish taught us how to pray. The Japanese taught us how to kill. The Americans taught us how to generate tons of garbage. And here it is, Smoky Mountain, a squatter camp built on a smouldering rubbish tip. Compared with so much of Africa, the Philippines countryside, its 1,000 islands, appear lush and comfortable, but still people flock to the city with its squalor and its violence to live like this. Why do they choose to? Grappling with the problem is the head of the Government Home Mortgage Corporation, Teodoro Katikbak.
I guess the primary reason is livelihood. They can't make ends meet in the countryside. And the secondary reason may be the typical lure of the city with the things that the city has which the countryside doesn't have. But the primary reason must be economic.
Now, if people come to a city like Manila with nowhere to live, are they entitled to turn to government or to local government? Can they assume they'll be taken care of?
They don't, as a rule. The Philippines has this tradition of extended families. So what typically happens is an extended family member comes to the city, succeeds in making ends meet, and his relatives or people from his barrio come over and ask him for advice or assistance.
But there's a lot of squatting, isn't there?
There
goes
is,
on
yes.
in a city like this. Whose land are they squatting on, and what does the owner do about it?
Well, we've taken a survey of something like 430 of the major so-called blighted or squatted areas. Well, 70% of this is private land, 30% is government land.
And what does government or the private landlord do about this? Do they kick them out, send for the bulldozers?
At the moment, there's very little they can do because the previous government issued a lot of so-called urban land reform decrees, which had the effect of raising people's hopes up. You know, they can't be arbitrarily removed from the places where they're now residing.
The very poor will squat in any available cranny, beside railways, storm-water gullies, rubbish tips, partly because it saves money in getting to where the work is. However poor, Filipinos hate to be called unemployed. Self-employed, they say, and scrape up any little chance to make a few pesos. This rat-like capacity to survive is an embarrassment to the authorities. It was to the Marcos regime, some of whose grandiose public works were immediately squatted and still are. But once again, it's hard for a government to profess sympathy with the homeless and then send in the demolition squad. Metro Manila, as the greater capital area is known, sprawls like London over what used to be several distinct communities. It's harder and harder for newcomers to find a foothold in the centre, so most of the housing effort is now far out in the sub-rural suburbs. This settlement, a church estate under the protection of the Cardinal Archbishop and financed by the Catholics of the Saarland in West Germany, is directed and driven by the incredible Sister Lydia Kalau, a nun who never takes no for an answer and who's bullied donors and bureaucrats into giving her what she wants, housing for the people, or rather her people. You won't get into an estate like this unless you have sound references from the church and you can afford the modest mortgage. So far, Sister Lydia's non-profit-making foundation has housed over 300 families in 2 Saarland villages, and less than a quarter of them are behind with their payments. To help them, small loans are made for cottage businesses like baking and dressmaking, and there are earnest classes in community self-management. As a result, you don't see many men hanging about doing nothing during the week, though at weekends the capacity of the poor to enjoy themselves breaks out once more in the occasional beer and shellfish beano. Sister Lydia's going down market. These row houses are more modest than she's built before, but as with the Zambian core houses, it'll be up to the occupants to finish them off and, if they like, add upper stories and extensions. The remarkable thing is how keen people are to help themselves, given half a chance. They don't expect very much of government anyway, and the skills demanded aren't too difficult. Unlike many resettlement projects, Sister Lydia claims that not one family has ever left her villages. First, because she trains them vigorously in the self-help philosophy, and second, she pays as much attention to employment as to housing. The two support one another. One of the penalties of moving to the city is that it's much harder to get by without a cash income. Shelter alone's not enough. But updated versions of cottage industry can put a job in the home and make all the difference. Children swarm everywhere in the Philippines. With the Catholic tradition still powerful, birth control is not officially sponsored as a cure for overcrowding. A rising standard of living usually slows down the population increase, but I'd hesitate to rely on it for Manila. But if family planning is out, Sister Lydia has other plans for the homeless poor. She's set up a self-help cooperative, independent of the church, so that the poorest of the poor can get away from the very worst of their illegal squats, places where they can only stay because nobody else wants them. Such a place is San Andres, in much the same league as Smoky Mountain, built over a swamp and infested by mosquitoes and drug peddlers. A single hosepipe brings in the only clean water for the community. Teetering along the catwalks, you'd better watch your footing. Not everyone survives a false step, as this mother, 15 years in the place, knows to her sorrow. You've got children?
I have children, 3 children.
3 children?
Then one died.
One died.
How did it die?
Fell down here.
Fell down the water.
In the water? Does this happen many times here?
Many times.
It's difficult, isn't it? You can't watch them all the time and they fall in.
No, kasi hindi ka nakaka-check kung ano sila, no?
Kasi sa pakisama sister, pag nangyayari yung aksidenteng yung wala ang magulang.
Yeah, no one was there to help him, to help the child when she fell. That's what she says.
I see.
Sometimes there's nobody helping the children here, so she fell and then died.
Kasi yung tubig hanggang dito.
Yeah, the water was up to here, the little boy. How old is siya?
1 year, 7
1
months.
year and 7 months old.
Sister Lydia's rehousing the family, saving it from going under. And yet San Andres has its vitality. It is a community, thanks to the spirit of these people determined to make homes on the uninhabitable. They deserve something much better. For one reason and another, their government can't give it them. And in circumstances like these, there's not much they can do for themselves. They can't build upwards, they can't spread outwards, and they don't want to move to where there's even less chance of working. Once people have figured out some way of existing, they'd sooner stay with it than take a gamble on starting all over again. But a government burdened by international debt can do little more than urge them to take the plunge.
Lately, the government have come up with a sort of advocacy group. This is the Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor. The role of this group is precisely to organize these squatters into self-help groups.
So the object is not to move them into government-built housing, not to chuck them out, but to get them to work for themselves.
Yes. Government hasn't enough money to put up housing projects to house them. What we're trying to do is see whether in the places where they reside, some kind of on-site slum upgrading can take place to give them the essential services of water, electricity, drainage, sanitation.
But what sort of housing are these very poor people able to construct on the site and the services that you provide? Surely it's not particularly desirable housing, is it?
You're absolutely correct. It is completely undesirable. They just pick up pieces of scrap roofing, tin roofing, and pieces of scrap wood, and they start off like this. But an interesting project has been the Tondo Foreshore project, which a couple of years ago was done with assistance from the World Bank. And this has now been around for about 5 years. And you can see that over the 5-year period, a lot of the occupants who previously had nothing more than bits and pieces have now started to construct permanent structures, in some cases 2-story structures made of concrete, and hollow blocks have come up.
So it's actually worth letting them start in a rather squalid way.
As long as you give them something to look forward to by giving them tenure on the property, so that they feel that what they put up is theirs.
That's what they basically really need, this security. They won't be chucked out, is that it?
Absolutely, yes.
With well over 1 million squatters to cope with, some of them second and third generation, site and services are about as much as the state can afford. But this means moving out into the countryside, away from where the people want to be. Most of those who settle here will have to waste time and money commuting, and some will probably drift back to the centre. Heaven's Gate, this section is called. The only service provided is a hole in the ground and a concrete cubicle for a toilet. The lucky householder will have to find his own materials to assemble round it. There doesn't seem to have been a rush for the privilege. About the only attraction is a few square meters of soil to grow vegetables in. Make no mistake, Manila is not all squalor and poverty. These are hard-working people, and when they're successful, they can be very successful. As in most of Asia, the gap between very rich and very poor is all too obvious. Sister Lydia herself comes from a wealthy and influential family, which may account for the clout she carries and the results she gets. How long the well-to-do can stay in power, and what good it would do if the communist insurgents took over, I'd sooner not guess. The Americanization of the Philippines is skin deep. Politically and economically, they are unstable. The new democracy is frail, menaced by violence, slow to produce the results that the people expected. But even the worst-looking of slums is a tribute to the ability of the poor to take care of themselves, to make a community in spite of government. The extended family, village loyalties brought into the city are valuable reserves of strength. Given security, given or even loaned the basics, the homeless and ill-housed of the Third World can and do help themselves. But what use is any of this to the homeless or ill-housed people of an advanced nation set in its ways like Britain? For many years, John Turner has been an advisor on community housing schemes all over the world, including Britain. Looking back over what I'd seen of the year of shelter for the homeless, I realized that just a roof over one's head wasn't enough. So at what point does a shelter become a real home?
When it supports the life of the people who are living there, when it enables them to realize their own opportunities and their own expectations. If it blocks, if it frustrates what they're able to do, or what they hope to do, then one can say that it's not really a home. It is not a base from which you can live and develop.
So it's got to be the right thing in the right place.
Absolutely. And it's got to have access to the people and the services and the jobs that your life depends on.
Now, you've seen all this self-help and self-management going on in Asia and Africa, but what possible relevance can it have to the situation here in Britain? I mean, surely you can't have people running around shoving mud huts into public parks.
No, of course not. No, of
but
course
what
not.
can they do here?
Well, I think one has to look at the level of principle in the first place. What we're talking about is the opportunity for people to be self-managing and to be able to use what they know, their own local knowledge. Because one must remember that everybody is the world's best expert on their own situation. But then one can go a step further than that. one can look at the level of, let's say, methods, of the actual procedures and the techniques that people use. Now, sometimes those are transferable, not perhaps the use of mud, no? But perhaps the way in which a group gets organized, the way in which the group works with the architects or with the technicians. Now, there may not be very much difference between the, let's say, the enabling architect working in Zambia or Lusaka or the enabling architect working in London. It could be very much the same, and they could probably learn quite a lot from each other, the ways in which they use those techniques.
Well, do you know of any case in the inner cities here where your philosophy has been applied and worked?
Yes, in our own neighbourhood, just a few hundred yards from this house, the Broadway Market Phase 3 is a development which Circle 33 Housing Association was charged with, and the then local director, Simon Kuczynski, felt that it would be important to involve people. So he suggested that we try out a participation in the design and planning process only with neighbours of the same kinds of people who would eventually be living there. And it worked out extremely well. The architects were a little bit resistant to begin with, but when they got into it, the architects realized that the people themselves knew a great deal more than they did about the way in which people live and the problems that would arise from this or that kind of design. And through cooperation, through collaboration, they ended up with an excellent design which has now been built.
Even the doors, with their big old-fashioned panes of glass, are by popular demand. And instead of a tower or a barracks, you get something more like a little village. But it's no use pretending we can house the rising population of the Third World to European standards. No government in Asia, Africa, or Latin America has the resources to mass-produce high-grade housing estates, and it probably wouldn't be a good idea if it tried. Homeless people in Britain aren't often in a position to build their own homes, but they could get together to run them and maintain them once they were built according to their needs. The first lesson of the Third World is to stop crying over the slums and realize what extraordinary achievements they are. John Turner remarks that it's the poor who are actually building most of the world's cities. Less than half their housing is provided by local authorities or charities. The people's energy is a great national resource, but governments, anxious to control everything and show off textbook projects, too often hold that energy back. This doesn't mean that anarchy is the solution, or that government doesn't need to make any plans at all. But more would get done if governments stopped fussing over petty controls and regulations and concentrated on enabling these people to take care of themselves as best they can afford. And after a while, they'd be able to afford something better. What's more, they build extremely economically, using up far less of their country's scarce resources than industrial contractors would do. The first thing they need to get started is the promise of security where they are. It's hard not to weep for the Third World, especially when some new catastrophe tugs at our hearts and our purses. But this overlooks the main point, which is the continuous drive of the people to house themselves, feed themselves, support themselves given a chance. Their worst enemies are not their own fault. They are bureaucracy, war, and the beggaring of their economies. Bureaucracy we do have in Britain, but we have peace and a fair degree of prosperity. Why can't we release the energy of our unemployed to house the homeless, perhaps modestly at first, but with scope for self-improvement? If the local council is discredited and the property developer uninterested, why don't we mobilize the forgotten resources of the poor themselves?